My son, Mark, told me this was a respite vacation, a place for me to rest my mind. But this morning, when I tested the door to my room, I discovered the lock wasn't there to keep others out. It was there to keep me in. The realization didn't come with a crash. It was a slow, creeping cold that started in my fingertips and worked its way into my bones. The door handle, a heavy, commercial-grade lever, didn't turn. It stopped with a solid, metallic finality. I tried it again, gentler this time, as if I could coax it into behaving. Nothing. I pressed my ear to the cool wood, and I could hear the faint, distant hum of the building, the squeak of a cart's wheels down the hall. Life was going on out there. But in here, in room 2B, it had stopped. They call this place Maple Creek Senior Living. It sounds like a postcard, doesn't it? Like a place with rocking chairs on a wide porch and the smell of baking bread. The reality is the scent of lemon-scented disinfectant that never quite masks a deeper, medicinal odor. The walls are a pale, non-committal beige, the kind of color chosen specifically so no one could possibly object to it or love it. The window looks out onto a perfectly manicured lawn, a square of green so flawless it looks like a carpet. There isn't a single weed, not a single fallen leaf. It's a lawn that has had all of its life tidied out of it. My home in Granville, my home has weeds. I know exactly which ones are dandelions and which are the stubborn clover that Robert, my late husband, used to fight with every spring. My home smells of old books and the lavender I keep in little sachets in the drawers. It smells of 10 years of living alone and 60 years of living a life. This room smells of nothing, of absence. Mark had been so convincing. His face, usually tight with a worry I could never quite name, had softened. "Just for a couple of weeks, Mom," he'd said, his hand on my arm. His touch felt strange, not like the familiar comfort of my son, but like a gesture he was performing. "You've been seeming so tired, so forgetful. This place is wonderful, chefs, activities. It's like a cruise ship that doesn't move. You'll come back completely refreshed." I had let myself believe him. It was easier. For months, he'd been pointing out every little slip. The day I couldn't find my reading glasses, which were perched on top of my head. The time I forgot to buy milk, normal things, the small taxes of being 79. But in his telling, they became evidence. They were bricks he was using to build a case against me, and I was too tired to push them over. My quiet nature, my tendency to observe rather than argue, had become a liability. He saw it as weakness. Maybe I had started to see it that way too. Have you ever been in a place that's supposed to feel safe, but your own instincts are screaming at you to run? That's the feeling I have now, standing in the middle of this beige room. It's a low, persistent hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. It's the same feeling an animal must have just before the trap springs. The air changes. Everything looks the same, but it feels different. Dangerous. I look at the few things they allowed me to bring. A stack of books I have no interest in reading. A framed photo of Robert and me taken on our 40th anniversary. His arm is around me and we are both smiling, our faces a roadmap of wrinkles earned through decades of shared laughter and worries. I look at his eyes in the photograph. He was a pragmatic man, an engineer. He saw the world as a series of problems to be solved. He always told me, "Helen, you see the things between the lines. Trust that." And I see it now. I see the careful planning. The way Brenda, the caregiver Mark hired, would helpfully take my phone to charge it in another room. The way my mail started to disappear, replaced with Brenda's cheerful summary of nothing important, dear, just bills. The way Mark would look at me, not with the eyes of a loving son, but with the calculating gaze of someone assessing an asset. The vacation was a lie. The concern was a performance. This isn't a cruise ship. It's a cage. A very polite, beige, lemon-scented cage. And the key is on the outside. My heart isn't racing. I'm a librarian after all. I've spent my life in the quiet. But inside that quiet, a single, cold, hard question is forming. It's not why. I think I know why. The question is, what does a librarian do when she finds herself trapped in the wrong story? That cold, hard question hangs in the sterile air, and the harsh, fluorescent light of the hallway seems to flicker. It dissolves, and suddenly I am bathed in the soft, warm morning sun of my own kitchen just a few months ago. The air then didn't smell of disinfectant. It smelled of brewing coffee and the damp, earthy scent of my hydrangeas through the open window. My life then was a quiet, comfortable rhythm, a song I had composed over many years. Mornings were for the garden. My knees would ache a little as I knelt on my foam pad, but my hands knew the difference between the root of a rose bush and the tenacious grip of a weed without me even having to think. There was a profound satisfaction in that small patch of earth. It was mine. I understood it, and it responded to my care. Afternoons, I would walk into town. Granville is the kind of place where the sidewalks are made of brick and the rhythm of life is measured. The librarians at the public library, my old kingdom, still knew me. We'd talk about new acquisitions, the latest biography everyone was reading. It was a simple life, but it was wholly mine. I paid my own bills, balanced my own checkbook, and corresponded with old friends in long, handwritten letters. I was not a problem to be solved. I was just Helen. The change began subtly, like the turning of a season. Mark started visiting more. At first, I was pleased. Since his father passed, and especially since his divorce, he had been distant. He lived an hour away in Columbus, and his life always seemed to be a whirlwind of stress and vague business troubles. These new, frequent visits felt like a gift. He'd bring groceries I didn't need and fuss over the dust on a bookshelf I hadn't gotten to yet. He was being attentive, I told myself. He was being a good son. But the attentiveness had a strange edge to it. It was forensic. He watched me. If I paused mid-sentence to find a word, he would jump in with, "It's okay, Mom, take your time." His tone was patient, but his eyes were not. His eyes were taking notes. I remember one Tuesday afternoon vividly. I was looking for my favorite pair of gardening shears. I'd searched the potting shed, the garage, the kitchen drawers. They were simply gone. Annoyed, I muttered to myself, "Honestly, Helen, you'd lose your head if it wasn't screwed on." Mark, who had been sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone, looked up instantly. "What did you lose, Mom?" "My shears. The good ones with the red handles. I can't find them anywhere." He stood up and walked over to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. It was meant to be comforting, but it felt heavy. "Mom, they're right here," he said, pointing to the counter. And there they were, right next to the fruit bowl. I had looked there, I was sure of it. A wave of embarrassment washed over me. "Oh," I said, forcing a laugh. "Well, look at that, thank you, dear." He didn't smile back, he just squeezed my shoulder. "Are you sure you're okay, Mom? You seem to be. Misplacing things a lot lately. Last week it was your glasses." The glasses, the ones that had been on my head, a normal, silly moment of absent-mindedness. But now, paired with the shears, it became part of a pattern, a data point in his growing thesis about my incompetence. He wasn't helping me find my things, he was cataloging my failures. Each one was a small stone he placed on a scale, trying to tip the balance against me. He started framing his suggestions as my own ideas. "You know, you mentioned last month that you were feeling a bit overwhelmed by the bills," he'd say. I had never said that. I had mentioned that the cost of electricity had gone up. "Maybe it's time I helped you set up automatic payments, just to take one thing off your plate." I resisted at first, but his concern was like a steady, gentle rain. It wasn't a storm you could fight, just a persistent dampness that wore you down over time. I didn't want to seem difficult. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. He was my son and he was trying. That's what I told myself. So I let him. I let him onto my bank accounts. I let him have a key to my filing cabinet. I thought I was making him feel useful, appeasing his strange, new anxiety. I didn't realize I was handing him the tools he would need to dismantle my life. The final piece of his plan arrived on a sunny May afternoon, a day that felt far too beautiful for the beginning of the end. He brought her over, Brenda. She stood on my doorstep next to Mark, radiating a kind of aggressive cheerfulness. She was a stout woman in her 50s with a bright, floral print blouse and a smile that seemed permanently affixed to her face. "It is just so wonderful to finally meet you, Helen," she boomed, taking my hand in both of hers. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her skin cool and dry. "Brenda is a professional companion," Mark explained, beaming as if he'd just invented sliced bread. "She's got years of experience. She'll just pop in a few times a week, help with groceries, maybe a bit of light housekeeping, drive you to appointments. It'll be a great relief for both of us." A relief, as if I were a great burden that had finally been lifted. Brenda glided into my home and immediately began to take inventory, her eyes scanning my living room, my kitchen, my life. "Oh, what a lovely home! So many treasures," she said. It didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like an appraisal. In the first week, her help was a form of subtle sabotage. She helpfully reorganized my pantry. The chamomile tea I drank every night was moved from its usual shelf to a high cabinet behind a stack of old platters. The salt was suddenly where the sugar used to be. "Just making things more logical, dear," she'd chirp when I'd stand there, confused, my own kitchen suddenly a foreign country. Each time I couldn't find something, it became another piece of evidence. I could feel it. I was no longer just forgetful. I was becoming incapable. She was the perfect gaslighter. She never accused, only sympathized. When I found my favorite fountain pen, the one Robert gave me in the silverware drawer, she shook her head with a look of deep, theatrical pity. "Oh, Helen, honey, you poor thing. Your mind is just working so hard these days, isn't it?" The phone calls were the worst part. She'd take her cell phone out to the back porch, thinking I couldn't hear through the screen door. But my hearing has always been sharp. I'm an observer, a listener. It's the one skill age hasn't taken from me. I wouldn't hear everything, just snippets, carried on the breeze along with the scent of my peonies. "Another confused spell this morning," I heard her say one day, her voice losing its cheerful boom and taking on a conspiratorial, serious tone. "Couldn't find the tea. Stared at the cabinet for a full minute. It's definitely progressing, Mark. Yes, I'm documenting everything, just like we discussed." No, she doesn't suspect a thing. She's sweet as can be. My blood ran cold, documenting everything. My life wasn't just being observed, it was being curated into a narrative of decline. A story was being written about me, without my consent, and I was the villain of the piece, a frail, incompetent old woman who was a danger to herself. And what did I do? I said nothing. My fatal flaw, my lifelong habit of choosing peace over conflict, kicked in. To confront her would mean a scene. It would mean upsetting Mark. It would mean I was being difficult or paranoid, words I was sure they were already using to describe me behind my back. So I retreated into my quiet. I pretended I didn't hear. I would smile politely when Brenda found the very thing she had hidden. I played the part they had written for me, hoping that if I was compliant enough, this strange fever dream would pass. It was easier to doubt my own ears than to accept the terrifying truth, that my son, my own flesh and blood, was conspiring with a stranger to steal my mind from me, one misplaced teacup at a time. Each day she was there, the walls of my own home felt like they were closing in. The house was full of her floral perfume, a scent that was beginning to make my stomach churn with a sick, sweet dread. And I would sit in my favorite armchair, a book open in my lap, not reading a single word, just listening. Listening to the quiet ways my life was being dismantled. The memory of her cloying sweetness and the chilling whispers on the phone is so potent, even now, that it makes my stomach tighten in the sterile room. It makes me turn, instinctively, to the small, framed photo on my nightstand. The only true thing I have left. It's Robert and me, standing under the old oak tree in our backyard on our 40th anniversary. His arm is a solid, comforting weight around my shoulders. His face, a landscape I knew better than my own, is breaking into a smile. I pick up the cool, silver frame. My thumb traces the line of his jaw. Robert was not a man of flowery words. He was an engineer. He saw the world in terms of structure, stress points, and solutions. He believed in things that were provable, tangible. But he saw something in me that was the opposite of all that, something he cherished. He called it my quiet sight. I can hear his voice now, not as a faint echo, but as a clear, steady presence in the silence of this room. We were sitting on the porch one evening, watching a thunderstorm roll in across the fields. I had mentioned a feeling I had about a new neighbor, a sense of unease that I couldn't explain. I had no evidence, no logical reason. Robert just nodded, watching the distant lightning. "You see more than anyone I know, Helen," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "You see the things between the lines, the things people don't say. It's a different kind of intelligence. Don't ever let someone else's noise make you doubt the quiet things you notice." His words now are not just a comfort, they are a call to arms. For the past few months, I had let the noise, Mark's manufactured concern, Brenda's poisonous sweetness, drown out my own quiet sight. I had let them convince me that my intuition was just the ramblings of a failing mind. Looking at Robert's face, I feel a flicker of the woman I was when he was alive. A woman who was trusted, whose perceptions were valued. A woman who was a partner, not a project. And thinking of Robert inevitably leads me to think of Mark, and the deep, complicated chasm between the two of them. Mark was never like his father. Robert believed in methodical work, in building things brick by brick. Whether it was the deck on our house or his career at the manufacturing plant, he believed in process, in earning your place. Mark always wanted to find the elevator. He saw his father's steady, principled approach not as honorable, but as plodding. He wanted the corner office without the long climb. It led to a life of half-finished projects and almosts. The real estate license he got just before the market crashed. The tech startup that never got beyond a fancy business plan. Each time there was an excuse, a reason outside of himself for the failure. And through it all, there was a low hum of resentment directed at his father's legacy. It wasn't loud, but I could feel it. After Robert passed, that resentment seemed to curdle into a kind of desperate impatience. He looked at me, at the house his father had paid off, at the savings his father had meticulously built, and I don't think he saw a mother or a home. I think he saw the elevator he had been looking for his whole life. He must have seen my quiet nature, my aversion to confrontation, as the perfect design flaw to be exploited. A weak point in the structure he could press until it broke. He probably told himself he was doing the right thing. It's a story he would be very good at telling himself, that I was failing, that he was simply stepping in to manage things, to protect his inheritance, to protect me from me. Clutching this photo, I feel a sense of clarity that cuts through the fog of confusion they have so carefully constructed around me. My mind isn't the problem. My memory isn't the problem. The problem is my son. And the problem is that I let him because I was afraid of the ugliness that would surface if I fought back. Robert wouldn't have been afraid. He would have looked at the situation, identified the stress points, and reinforced them. He would have trusted what I saw. The thought of his pragmatism, his belief in solid facts, makes my mind race back, searching for my own evidence, for a tangible clue I might have missed. And that's when I remember it. A conversation I'd brushed aside, painting over its strange colors with the pale beige of wishful thinking. It was about a week before Mark brought me here, on a bright, windy afternoon. I was walking back from my mailbox at the end of the driveway, sorting through the usual collection of catalogs and bills. My neighbor, Carol, was in her own yard, wrestling with a stubborn branch on her forsythia bush. Carol has been my neighbor for 30 years. We've watched each other's children grow up, borrowed cups of sugar, and mourned each other's husbands. She's not a gossip, but she is, like me, an observer. She sees things. "Helen, you have a minute," she called over, wiping a smear of dirt from her forehead with the back of her glove. I walked over to the low stone wall that separated our properties. "Everything all right, Carol?" She glanced toward my house, then back at me, lowering her voice slightly as if the air itself might be listening. "I don't want to be a busybody," she started, which is always the preface to being a busybody for a very good reason. "But I saw Mark downtown yesterday. He was coming out of that new law office, the one that took over the old bookstore space." "Oh," I said, my interest mild. Mark handled his own affairs. "He was with another man," she continued, her brow furrowed in a way that meant she was truly puzzled. "A man in a very expensive suit, Looked like one of those slick Columbus lawyers, not a local. The thing is, Helen, Mark looked terrible. Terrible how? Pale, she said, clipping the word. Shifty. He kept looking over his shoulder like he was afraid someone might see him. When the lawyer put a hand on his back, Mark flinched. It wasn't a friendly meeting. It felt heavy. I just got a bad feeling from it. I remember my reaction so clearly. I felt a pang, but it wasn't one of suspicion. It was a pang of misplaced maternal sympathy. My poor son, I thought. He's under so much pressure. That business of his must be in trouble again. All I wanted to do was protect him, to soothe the situation. Oh, you know Mark, I said to Carol, forcing a light, dismissive laugh. Always so dramatic. It's probably just some boring business contract. Thank you for telling me, though. I had shut her down. Gently, politely, but I had shut her down. I had taken her genuine concern, a piece of raw data offered by a trusted friend, and I had filed it away under unnecessary worry. I didn't want to believe that my son could be involved in anything that would make him look shifty. I chose the more comfortable explanation because the alternative was too ugly to contemplate. My blind spot wasn't just about avoiding conflict. It was about actively refusing to see the facts when they painted a picture of my family I didn't like. Now, sitting here in this room that is not my room, that single, overlooked memory flares up like a signal fire. A slick lawyer from the city, a secret meeting, my son looking pale and afraid. It wasn't about a failing business. Of course it wasn't. It was about this. It was about me. They were planning it even then. They were drafting the documents, learning the legal words they would need to use to turn a mother into a non-person. The expensive suit wasn't for a business deal. It was for the business of my undoing. How could I have been so blind? How could I have prioritized my son's comfort over the blaring alarm bells of my own friend's intuition? The shame of it is a physical thing, a hot wave that washes over me. I had all the pieces, but I refused to put them together. I was the librarian who refused to read the book because she was afraid of the ending. The memory of Carol's worried face fades, replaced once again by the blank beige wall of my room here at Maple Creek. But the room looks different now. It's no longer just a place of quiet dread. It's a crime scene, and I, the victim, am finally starting to look for fingerprints. The overlooked clue, once a source of shame, now echoes in my mind as a starting point. It's a thread. And I have a feeling if I pull on it, this whole carefully woven trap will begin to unravel. My days here at Maple Creek took on a new purpose. Before, they were an endurance test, a stretch of empty hours to be survived. Now they were a study. I was a librarian again, but the subject wasn't history or fiction. It was my own captivity. My primary research subjects were Mark and Brenda. The control they exerted was absolute, but they cloaked it in the language of care. My access to the outside world was slowly strangled. My phone calls became limited to a single 15-minute supervised slot on Wednesdays. We find that too much outside stimulation can be agitating for new residents, Brenda would say, her smile never faltering. Agitating. As if my desire to speak to my friends, to hear a familiar voice, was a symptom of my illness. My mail was delivered to Brenda first, for screening. She'd hand me a small, curated pile of letters from distant cousins and perhaps a catalog, while tucking the real mail, bank statements, official-looking envelopes into her large tote bag. "Nothing to worry your pretty little head about, Helen," she'd coo. "Just bills and boring things. We're handling it all." That word was a constant, polished stone they threw at me. We think it's best. We're handling it. We're just trying to help. The word was designed to make me feel small, to make them seem like a united, powerful front. My fear, which had been a constant, shivering companion, began to do something strange. It began to burn. It burned away the fog of confusion and self-doubt, and what was left was not hot, explosive rage, but something colder, denser. It was the cold, clear anger of a woman who has been profoundly underestimated. They thought they were dealing with a frail, senile old lady. They had forgotten I was a librarian, I had spent 40 years managing a system of infinite detail, of cross-references and hidden connections. My mind was not a cluttered attic, it was a catalog, and I began to apply that skill to my captors. I stopped being a patient and became an ethnographer. I observed Brenda. I noted that her cheerfulness was a performance that slipped when she thought no one was watching. I saw the flash of irritation in her eyes when another resident needed help. I noticed she had a new, expensive-looking watch last week, and this week, a new designer handbag. Things a companion caregiver on a modest salary probably couldn't afford. I observed Mark during his weekly visits. He could barely look me in the eye. He'd talk about the weather, about sports, about anything other than what was actually happening. He'd fidget with his car keys, his gaze darting around the room, never settling on me. He wasn't the confident mastermind. He was a nervous foot soldier, terrified of what he had done. He was weak, and weakness meant carelessness. I began to test the boundaries of my cage, subtly. I started asking specific, difficult questions. "Mark," I asked one afternoon, my voice purposefully light and airy. "I was just thinking I need to check the balance on my main savings account, the one at Granville Trust. Could you bring me the latest statement next time you visit?" He froze, a deer in the headlights. He exchanged a panicked look with Brenda, who stepped in smoothly. "Oh, Helen, all of that is being managed now. You don't need to worry about a thing. We have it all under control." "I don't worry, Brenda," I said, looking directly at her, letting my gaze hold hers for a second longer than was comfortable. "I wonder. There's a difference." I saw it then, a flicker of something real in her eyes, not pity, not concern. Fear. She was afraid of me, afraid of what my the mind they were so intent on proving was broken, might be capable of. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. The balance of power had shifted, just a fraction of an inch, but it had shifted. They thought they were the observers and I was the subject. They had it all wrong. While they were busy building my cage, they hadn't noticed I was studying the lock. And outside the walls of this place, I knew someone else was watching, too. My steadfast neighbor, Carol. I could only hope that her worry had, by now, turned into the one thing I needed most: suspicion. I was right. Outside the walls of Maple Creek, my steadfast neighbor, Carol, had let her worry blossom into full-blown suspicion. I learned the details of it later, but in my mind's eye, I can see it all happening with perfect clarity. Her journey began with a casserole. A chicken and broccoli casserole, her specialty, the one she always brought over when someone was feeling under the weather. She drove to Maple Creek 2 weeks after I'd been admitted, casserole dish warm on her passenger seat, assuming she'd be visiting a friend who was, at worst, a little tired. She was met at the front desk by a receptionist with a smile as rigid and impersonal as the beige walls. "I'm here to see Helen Gable in room 2B, Carol said, hoisting the dish. The receptionist typed my name into her computer. Her smile didn't change. "I'm sorry, but Mrs. Gable is not accepting visitors at this time. We're trying to maintain a calm and stable environment for her as she adjusts." Carol, I know, would have stared at her, her expression perfectly pleasant but her eyes like chips of flint. A calm environment? A visit from a friend of 30 years is going to disrupt her environment. Helen is the calmest person I know. Let me just speak to her for a moment. "I'm afraid that's not possible," the receptionist repeated, her voice the auditory equivalent of a locked door. "Doctor's orders." That was the moment. That was the final, jarring note in a song that had been out of tune for weeks. Carol knew my doctor of 20 years, Dr. Albright. He was a man who believed friendship was as vital as medicine. He would never, ever give an order like that. She knew, with the certainty of a true friend, that something was terribly wrong. She drove home, the uneaten casserole sitting beside her like a silent accusation. Her mind, sharp and practical, began to work. She didn't have proof, only a deep, gut-wrenching feeling of wrongness. So she went looking for facts. Robert would have approved. She remembered the exact day I had left for my respite vacation because it was the same day her grandson had his spring concert. She had a date. Carol isn't particularly tech-savvy, but a few years ago her son had installed a simple security camera system for her, one that points down her driveway and captures a slice of my own. She had complained about it being an invasion of privacy, but her son had insisted. Now, she sat at her small desk, peering at the computer screen, and scrolled back through 2 weeks of footage. It was tedious work, watching the mailman come and go, the squirrels chasing each other across the lawn. And then she found it. Mid-afternoon on the day I left, Mark's dark blue sedan was parked in my driveway. The video showed him and a stout woman in a floral blouse, Brenda, walking out of my front door. They weren't carrying suitcases for a vacation. They were carrying my document boxes. The sturdy, gray, fireproof boxes where I kept everything: birth certificates, passports, tax returns, property deeds, bank records. My entire life, documented in paper and ink, was being loaded into the trunk of my son's car like it was old junk destined for the dump. The sight of it, she told me later, made her feel sick. It was cold, hard, irrefutable proof. This wasn't a vacation. It was an eviction. It was a heist. Her next problem was how to reach me. She couldn't call. She couldn't visit. So she got creative. She knew one of the young women who worked in the Maple Creek kitchens, a girl whose mother went to her church. The girl, Maria, was a sweet, quiet young woman who was saving up for community college. Carol met her in the parking lot of the grocery store the next day. She explained the situation simply, honestly. She showed Maria the photo of the boxes on her phone. Maria's eyes widened in understanding and sympathy. She had seen how the residents in 2B Wing were treated. She knew. The next day at lunch, as Maria cleared my tray, she leaned in close, her voice a whisper against the clatter of the dining hall. "Your neighbor, Carol, she says to tell you she knows. She has a video. She says to be strong." And as she lifted my plate, her hand brushed against mine, leaving behind a tiny, tightly folded square of paper, a note from the outside world. From a world that was still real. Hope, small and fragile, landed in the palm of my hand. I curled my fingers around it, a secret I held against the crushing weight of their lies. I curled my fingers around the tiny, smuggled note, its sharp edges pressing into my palm. Hope. It was such a small thing, but it felt like a key. I retreated to the bathroom, the only place with a door I could lock myself, and unfolded it. The paper was flimsy, torn from a notepad, but the words in Carol's familiar, neat script were solid as granite. "They took your boxes. I have it on video. Don't believe them. Be strong. See." I read it 3 times, my heart beating a steady, powerful rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It wasn't my quiet sight or a vague suspicion. It was real. Carol had seen it. There was proof. My hands were trembling, but not with the frail weakness they wanted me to feel. It was the tremble of a wire pulled taut, humming with a new and dangerous energy. I carefully tore the note into tiny pieces, flushed them down the toilet, and watched the confetti of my liberation swirl away. I was not alone. The confirmation gave me a new kind of patience. I spent the rest of the day in a state of hyper-aware calm, waiting. I knew that people who build their plans on lies eventually get tangled in them. Carelessness is the arrogant sister of deceit. I just had to wait for it. It came sooner than I expected. That afternoon, Brenda bustled into my room with a stack of old magazines. Good Housekeeping, Reader's Digest. The kind of reading material they believed a woman like me should consume. Wholesome, unchallenging, and intellectually neutered. "Thought you might like something to brighten your day, sweetie," she said, plunking them down on my nightstand with her usual forced cheer. I thanked her, my smile just as polite and meaningless as hers. I waited until she had gone, until the scent of her perfume had faded from my doorway. Then, I picked up the magazines. I wasn't interested in recipes or heartwarming stories. I was looking for anything out of place. I fanned the pages of each one, and in the center of a 2-year-old copy of Reader's Digest, tucked between an article on heart health and a collection of family-friendly jokes, A single folded piece of paper slid out and landed silently on my bedspread. My breath caught. It was a standard business envelope, but it had been opened and its contents hastily folded and shoved inside the magazine, likely for safekeeping. A place no one would ever think to look. A place Brenda must have forgotten. My fingers, steady now, unfolded the paper. The first page was a bank statement, but it wasn't from my bank, Granville Trust. It was from a large, anonymous national bank with a branch in Columbus. The account holder's name was Mark Gable. The address was his. But the opening deposit, dated just 6 weeks ago, was for $150,000, an amount that was, to the penny, the entire balance of my life's savings. Below it was a list of withdrawals: $10,000 for a down payment on a new car, $5,000 to a credit card company, $2,000 in cash. He was draining it, systematically. My future, my security, the money Robert and I had saved for half a century, was now his personal slush fund. The sight of it stole the air from my lungs, but the second page was what truly broke me. It was a carbon copy of an invoice. The letterhead read, Mid-Ohio Geriatric Consulting, LLC. I had never heard of them. The invoice was addressed to Mark. The itemized service was a full cognitive and competency evaluation for one Helen Gable. The cost was $5,000. The date was 3 weeks ago. An evaluation that never happened. A doctor I had never met. A verdict I had never received. This was the foundation of their entire story. Not my misplaced glasses, not my forgotten tea. This, a single, fraudulent $5,000 piece of paper that declared me unfit to manage my own life. It was the weapon they had used to get a judge to grant Mark conservatorship. It was the key to my cage. All the pieces snapped into place with a horrifying, crystalline clarity. The slick lawyer from the city, the hushed phone calls, the stolen boxes of documents, the isolation. It wasn't just a son taking advantage of his aging mother. It was a cold, calculated conspiracy. They hadn't just betrayed my trust. They had forged a new reality and forced me to live inside it. Staring at the fraudulent document, the quiet observer inside me, the woman who avoided conflict and always sought the path of least resistance, finally and completely died. And in her place, something else was born. The wife of a pragmatic engineer. A woman who now held all the evidence she needed. I carefully folded the papers and hid them beneath the thin mattress of my bed. There would be no direct confrontation with Brenda or Mark. That would be their game, a game of emotional manipulation and gaslighting that I would surely lose. My confrontation had to be strategic. It had to be precise. It had to be If the world outside these walls. My chance came the next day, Wednesday, the supervised phone call. Brenda led me to a small, cheerless office with a phone on a desk. She sat in a chair by the door, knitting, a portrait of benign oversight. She expected me to call my cousin Martha and talk about the weather and our respective aches and pains for 15 minutes. That was the script. My heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I took a deep breath, my hands steady as I picked up the receiver. I had one shot. I couldn't afford a single mistake. The number I needed to dial wasn't written down anywhere. It was etched into my memory from decades of Christmases and legal consultations, a number as familiar to me as my own address. I smiled sweetly at Brenda. "Just calling Martha," I said, my voice as frail and pleasant as she expected. I dialed. Each tone was a step across a chasm. I prayed he was still practicing. I prayed he was in his office. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a crisp, familiar voice answered. Davison Law. "Hello," I said, my voice still light, performing for my audience of one. "Is Martha there?" It was a code, a ridiculous, desperate password I had invented on the spot. There was a pause. "Ma'am, this is a law office. There's no one here by that name." "Oh, dear," I said, feigning confusion. I could feel Brenda's eyes on me. "I must have the wrong number. I was trying to reach my cousin. This is Helen Gable." I put a slight emphasis on my name, praying he would remember me, not just as a client, but as Robert's wife. Another pause, longer this time. Then the voice changed. The professional crispness softened with recognition. Helen, Robert's Helen, good heavens, it's been years. This is Arthur Davison. Are you all right? Relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. I kept the smile pasted on my face for Brenda's benefit. Oh, Arthur, what a surprise. I'm so sorry to have bothered you. My fingers must have slipped. You know how it is. I let out a little tinkling laugh that sounded utterly alien to my own ears. It's no bother at all, Helen, he said, and I could hear the concern in his voice. He knew something was wrong. How are you? This was it. I had to deliver the message. Oh, I'm just fine, I said, my voice dripping with false cheer. I'm on a little respite vacation my son Mark arranged for me over at a place called Maple Creek. It's just lovely. I infused the words respite vacation and Maple Creek with a tiny, almost imperceptible irony. But you know, I was just thinking about some old paperwork, Robert's files, and I seem to have misplaced a few very important things. I took a breath. I have a new companion named Brenda, who is documenting my health. In fact, she has a report from a consultant I've never met that says I'm not well. And my savings account seems to have taken a vacation of its own, to a new home where only Mark has the key. My neighbor, Carol, saw him moving the boxes. I delivered the information in a cheerful, rambling monologue, as if I were a confused old woman mixing up her stories. But I knew Arthur, like Robert, was a man who listened for the things between the lines. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I could hear the gears turning in his sharp, legal mind. Brenda shifted in her chair, the clicking of her knitting needles the only sound in the room. Finally, Arthur spoke, his voice low and deadly serious. Helen, he said, dropping all pretense, listen to me very carefully. Do not say another word about this to anyone, not to Mark, not to Brenda. Do you understand? Yes, Arthur, I whispered, the relief making my voice crack for the first time. I know where Maple Creek is. I will handle this. Sit tight. I will be in touch through the proper channels. You did the right thing by calling me. Thank you, I said. No, Helen, he replied, and for the first time I heard the echo of my husband's protective warmth in another man's voice. Thank you for trusting me. We said our goodbyes. I hung up the phone and turned to Brenda, my smile serene. Martha wasn't home, I said brightly, but it was so nice to have a little chat. She nodded, unsuspecting, and I walked past her, out of the office and back to my room, the weight in my chest replaced by the first true glimmer of hope. The confrontation hadn't been loud or dramatic. It had been quiet. It had been my own, and it was enough. Mr. Davison's promise hung in the air of my small room, a shield against the oppressive quiet. For the next few days, I lived in a state of suspended animation. I played my part. I ate the bland food, endured Brenda's saccharine chatter, and smiled my placid, empty smile. But underneath, I was vibrating with anticipation. I had planted a seed in the outside world, and now I could only wait and trust that it would grow. I didn't have to wait long. Arthur Davison, I would learn, moved with the speed and précis. Ion of a surgeon. He was, as Robert had always said, a man who did not suffer fools or tolerate injustice. My desperate, coded phone call was all the catalyst he needed. His first action was to file an emergency petition with the county court to immediately terminate Mark's conservatorship. He didn't go in with vague accusations. He went in with an arsenal. Exhibit A was a sworn affidavit from Carol, detailing her observations and her blocked visit. Exhibit B was a high-resolution printout from her security camera footage, time-stamped, showing my son and his accomplice removing my financial records from my home. Exhibit C was a meticulously drafted motion demanding an immediate and independent competency evaluation for me, to be performed by a court-appointed geriatric specialist. The court, faced with clear evidence of potential elder fraud, granted the motion instantly. The very next afternoon, a woman I had never seen before appeared at my door. She was not a nurse or a caregiver. She was Dr. Anya Sharma, a court-appointed psychologist. Brenda tried to stay in the room, to assist, but Dr. Sharma dismissed her with a polite but unbreakable firmness. "I am required to conduct this evaluation alone," she said, and for the first time, I saw Brenda look truly powerless as the door was closed in her face. Dr. Sharma was not there to trick me or to coddle me. She was there to assess me. We spoke for over 2 hours. We didn't just talk about my memory or the date. We talked about the books I'd read, about current events, about the intricate politics of my garden club. I explained the plot of the novel I was reading. I recounted my late husband's service in Korea. I laid out, with the calm precision of a librarian, the timeline of my son's behavior, the appearance of Brenda, and the evidence I had found. I told her about the invoice for the evaluation that never was. As I spoke, I could see the professional mask on her face soften into something else, focused anger and deep compassion. She left not with a vague assessment, but with a damning report that described me as highly lucid, intelligent, and a victim of a sophisticated scheme of psychological manipulation and isolation. That report was the battering ram that brought down Mark's entire fortress of lies. I wasn't there to see it, but Mr. Davison painted a vivid picture for me later. He and Mark, along with their respective lawyers, were summoned for an emergency hearing. When Mr. Davison presented Dr. Sharma's report alongside Carol's evidence, the judge's face, I'm told, was a mask of thunder. The temporary conservatorship was not just terminated, it was obliterated, expunged from the record with a scathing rebuke from the bench. The judge immediately froze the secret bank account Mark had opened and ordered a full accounting of every penny he had taken. The final, crushing blow was the announcement that the court was forwarding the entire case file, including the fraudulent invoice from the consultant and the evidence of financial exploitation, to the district attorney's office with a recommendation for criminal charges. The fallout was immediate. That same evening, a uniformed sheriff's deputy arrived at my house in Granville. My house, where Mark and Brenda had apparently been staying, making plans for a full renovation. They were served with the court orders and a notice of criminal investigation in the very living room where I had raised my son. Brenda, the professional schemer, reportedly burst into tears. Mark, my son, the man who wanted the elevator, simply turned white as a sheet. He had reached the top floor, only to find it was a cage of his own making. The walls he had built to trap me had, in the end, trapped only him. 2 days later, Mr. Davison himself came to pick me up from Maple Creek. There was no fanfare. I walked out of the same doors I had entered as a prisoner, but this time, I walked out as myself. I didn't look back. The beige walls and the scent of lemon disinfectant already felt like a scene from someone else's life. The drive back to Granville was quiet. The late summer landscape of Ohio rolled past the car window, familiar and comforting. When we pulled into my driveway, the first thing I saw was Carol, standing on her porch, watching for me. She didn't wave or rush over. She just gave me a slow, single nod. It was a nod of profound respect, a silent acknowledgement of the battle that had been fought and won. I unlocked my own front door with my own key. The house was cool and silent. It smelled of dust and stale air, but underneath it all, it smelled like home. It smelled of old wood, of my books, of a life. I walked through the rooms, touching the back of my favorite armchair, running a hand along the spines of the books in my living room, gazing out the kitchen window at my slightly neglected garden. The house was the same. The hydrangeas needed water, and there was a fine layer of dust on the mantel. But it was all Blaise. Acidly, beautifully the same. The person who had returned to it, however, was fundamentally different. The old Helen would have been shattered by Mark's betrayal. She would have retreated further into her shell, wounded and afraid. But the woman who stood in her own living room that day felt a strange and unfamiliar peace. The anger that had burned so cold and clear had served its purpose. It had fueled me to act. Now, what was left was a quiet, unshakable strength. The legal proceedings against Mark and Brenda are ongoing. Mr. Davison tells me the case is strong. They will face consequences for what they did. I find I don't think about it much. My focus is not on their punishment, but on my own recovery. I think of Mark not with searing hatred, but with a deep, sorrowful pity for the weakness that led him to commit such an ugly act. He sought a shortcut his whole life, and it led him off a cliff. He broke my heart, yes, but he did not break my spirit. That, I discovered, was not his to break. A week after I returned, Carol came over and we sat in my garden, sipping iced tea. The hydrangeas were already looking better. "I was so worried, Helen," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "I felt so helpless." "You were the furthest thing from helpless, Carol," I told her, reaching across the small patio table to put my hand on hers. "You were my anchor to the real world. You were the one who saw something and said something. You listened to that feeling." "Your husband always said you were the one who saw things," she said with a small smile. "He did," I said, looking out at the familiar landscape of my yard. "My mistake was in believing that seeing things was enough. I learned that my quiet sight is useless unless it's paired with a voice. For 79 years, I kept that voice quiet because I thought it would keep the peace. I didn't realize that some kinds of peace are just prisons in disguise." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the afternoon sun warming our faces. My healing isn't happening in a therapist's office or a courtroom. It's happening here, in these small, reclaimed moments. It's in the simple joy of choosing what to have for dinner, of answering my own phone, of walking to the library on my own 2 feet. It's in the quiet confidence of knowing that if I misplace my glasses, it is not a symptom of my decline. It is simply a sign that I need to remember where I put my glasses. My legacy, the story I leave behind, will not be one of a victim. It will be the story of a woman who was reminded, in the harshest way possible, of her own strength. It's the story of a quiet librarian who, when her life was stolen and rewritten by others, had the courage to pick up a pen and write the final, true chapter for herself. Helen's story began in a quiet, beige room, but it ended in the vibrant color of her own garden, reclaimed and reborn. Her journey is a powerful reminder that a person's worth is not measured by their age, and that a quiet voice, when armed with the truth, can be the most powerful force of all. It reminds us that intuition is not a symptom of confusion. It is a form of wisdom. We should never let anyone convince us to doubt what we know to be true in our own hearts. If Helen's story of resilience resonated with you, or if it reminded you of someone you know, please consider sharing it. Your share can be a light for someone else who may be feeling isolated or silenced, letting them know that they are seen and they are not alone. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of strength, survival, and the quiet triumphs of the human spirit. And please, add your own voice to our community in the comments below. Your thoughts, your experiences, and your words of encouragement create a space of support for everyone. Finally, and most importantly, if you or a loved one are facing a situation that feels unsafe or manipulative, please know that there is confidential help available. Organizations like the National Center on Elder Abuse, NCEA, offer resources and support. You are not a burden, and you have the right to be safe, respected, and in control of your own life. You can find links and information in the description below. Thank you for listening.